Hey everybody, it's me, Maxwell Adams. I'm the writer, producer, and director of Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo, and this is a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josic, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Okay, we're all set.
Gee, we just might arrive safely at the Halloween movie festival after all. Look, a spooky old castle.
Let's see the famous Gary Coleman fix that.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 41 of the podcast. I'd also like to wish a very happy Halloween to all of you. This is one of my favorite times of the year, and a time of the year that's kind of inextricably tied with Scooby-Doo. Whether you're somebody who likes to put together a costume and go out as a member of the gang, or the gang in its entirety. I've seen a number of those photographs. Or if you just like to sit down with yourself or your family and watch episodes or films that feature the gang tackling ghosts and goblins, real or otherwise, usually otherwise. Scooby-Doo and Halloween, in my opinion, have always kind of fit hand in glove. It was also kind of a staple during the 90s with the early Cartoon Network. They had the whole catalog of the old Hanna-Barbera and Looney Tunes shows, and they would do marathons. And on Halloween, they would usually do a Scooby-Doo marathon, and in order to have something to kind of play between the episodes, they would come up with original content. And that kind of ran the gamut of a number of sort of different concepts and ideas, but two of the kind of most famous as far as Scooby-Doo fandom is concerned are the Scooby-Doo Project, which I covered on the show back in episode 30 and 31 with my interview with Casper Kelly and Larry Morris, co-writers and co-directors of that wonderful, wonderful Blair Witch parody. And a couple years later, that was followed up with Night of the Living Doo, which sort of went by the new Scooby-Doo movies kind of format, having, David Cross as a guest star, and rather than mixing kind of the classic animation with live action stuff, it was basically trying to recreate sort of a full episode circa 1972. Gary Coleman was also a guest star, as well as Big Bad Voodoo Daddy as the musical guest, and Mark Hamill makes a guest appearance as the character Mr. Shifty and playing himself. If you haven't seen Night of the Living Doo, I would highly recommend tracking it down before listening to this episode, or it might spoil things. I'm currently in the process of trying to get a hold of kind of a pristine copy of it. It's available on YouTube, as most of these things are. It's not the greatest copy. It's missing the opening titles. It's serviceable. It's all there. You can watch it. It's entertaining. But I've been talking with one of my guests about getting a better copy of it out there, much in the same vein as when Larry Morris contributed pretty much the best quality fidelity copy of the Scooby-Doo Project, currently available online. Links to that on the show notes for those episodes, and I can, if I remember, I'll add it to the show notes for this one as well. Now, here to talk about the Scooby-Doo Project, I was lucky enough to get returning guest and friend of the show, Casper Kelly, to come back and talk about his contributions to that project, as well as producer Ashley Kohler, who we wanted to get for Scooby-Doo Project, but she wasn't available at the time. But we were lucky enough to nab her for this conversation, and Ashley was great. Having the producer's perspective on these projects was a nice point of view to have. And Ashley also comes at these things from not just kind of a producing standpoint, but she's also a very creative individual, and that creativity was sort of key to her role back then at Cartoon Network. The producers there were sort of part and parcel of the whole process, and that's pretty cool. I know I keep saying this, but this is one of my favorite conversations that I've had on the show. I really enjoyed chatting with Ashley and Casper. Oh, and before I forget, I should qualify, as some of you may know from the previous interview with Casper and Larry, Casper is a professional name that he goes by. His real name is Chris Kelly, and those who work with him tend to still call him Chris Kelly. So, much like Larry did, Ashley slips up a few times. It jumps back between Chris and Casper. So just in case there's any cognitive dissonance, that's what's going on there. There is nothing wrong with your audio. Do not adjust your set. Everything is good. I don't think I have anything else to add there, so I'm just going to let you guys get straight to the conversation. Again, thank you so much for checking this out today. This is being released on Halloween. This is the Halloween trick, I guess. There is a treat in store on its way. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the outro on the other side. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ashley Kohler and Casper Kelly, and we will see you all on the other side. My guest today worked on the franchise for the first time during what is widely considered the dark period, the dark times for Scooby-Doo, but it was a very bright time for Cartoon Network, where there was a lot of innovation and creativity bubbling to the surface. They had a lot of freedom, and some really interesting things came out of there. Things such as the Scooby-Doo Project, lots of crazy stuff, as well as the show that we're going to kind of primarily focus on today, which was Night of the Living Doo. They've continued to work together on various projects, and I believe is the most recent one working on Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell together, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Although there's a newer one coming around the bend. Yes,
All right.
Yes. As of this date, yes.
So please join me in welcoming to the show Ashley Kohler and Casper Kelly.
Hello,
Friend of the
hello.
show, Casper Kelly, returning guest.
Yes.
Hi.
And I'm going to introduce Ashley a little further because I'm such a fan of hers.
I welcome it.
She is a amazing producer and helped empower us to make so many things, and never said no, always find a way to do things, even if the budget was limited or the time. And then she went on to start her own company, Awesome Incorporated, which would go on to animate Harvey Birdman, Bird Girl, Squidbillies. Her company does the CGI animation for my show, Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell. They did Too Many Cooks. They did that crazy shot that looked like a miniature spaceship on strings, but it was all done in CGI. And many, many, many other things. So, yes.
Thanks,
Big
Chris.
I feel like I need to edit in applause.
We've been lucky. I was just reminiscing. We've been lucky to work together for a very long time and on a very bunch of really amazing projects together. And we collaborate together well and have a lot of cool stories and also get to be friends. So that's a big bonus. It's great when you get to have such a fantastic collaborative working relationship and friendly relationship for a long time. It's kind of rare and kind of lucky in that regard. I'm a huge fan of Chris's as well. I mean, Casper's.
And one other rare thing about Ashley is she also has great taste. And you can ask her, is this joke better or that joke? Or should I cut this? And not all producers have that skill as well. So yeah, she can I'm not explaining what I want here. And then Ashley will come in and go, what he's saying is he wants this, this, and that, so you can help clarify what I'm saying. So that's amazing too.
Wow.
Maybe you can retroactively
Yes.
clarify my introduction, which was clumsy as hell.
All right, I'm going to start off. I believe this project was not originally assigned to me. It was assigned to Jeff Olson and maybe Matt Pacini, who also worked at Cartoon Network. And I think it was him. And he left the company, or maybe it was someone else. But I was brought in late in the game. They had already decided they were going to. I believe it was another Halloween ish stunt for Scooby-Doo, which
It aired on Halloween. I know
Okay.
that. It aired on the 31st in 2001.
And they had already decided they were going to riff on that series of Scooby-Doo. I can't remember the name of it, where they would have Don Knotts or Laurel Hardy.
New Scooby-Doo movies.
The new Scooby-Doo movies. What? Yeah, the odd malign was Sandy Duncan, I think, was one.
Yep.
And Phyllis. I guess whoever they could license. I don't know.
Here's how it worked, and I was just talking to Mike about this story. It was a very short. New Scooby-Doo movies, a very short period of time, and all those random string of people was because they had contracts through CBS. So all of those stars had a contract for something else, some other reason with CBS. And as a clause in the contract, they had to do one of these.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's why the parade of people is so weird in those movies, because it's like Davy Jones and Sandy Duncan and Jonathan Winters and Don Knotts, none of which are people that really kids would be like, oh, I love Jonathan Winters.
Yeah.
But he had a separate agreement with CBS, so he had to be in one of these Scooby movies. And so that's why it's such a disparate group of people, but they all had a CBS contract in common during that period of 2 years in the 70s. And so, yeah, we decided to make a funny, disparate, celebrity thing. And I've been trying to wrap my head and remember around how it worked for us too. And I think my job wasn't, I don't know if you'll remember, but I don't think it was like we came at it with a list of specific celebrities and band. I don't think it was like, we want Gary Coleman, David Cross, whatever. I think it was like, let's go see who we can get and pick out of those. So I feel like I was calling agents and being like, who can I get? And then we picked out of that list the disparate people to put in it. Is that how you remember it? Or do you think that we were like specifically, we want Gary Coleman and David Cross and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy? I don't feel like that's how it worked.
Just
Go ahead.
To the previous conversation that never made it to air with Casper, and he was saying that David Cross was actually someone you sought out because you were a big fan of Mr. Show.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he was on. I think he was more. He had circled maybe doing something with us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we approached him because we were such big fans of that time. But the other ones, I think you're right. It was
kind of like a buckshot of like, who could we possibly get? And then out of that list that I came back with, it was like, okay, we'll take these people. This would be funny to put it together. Because I think that's, it definitely was disparate, but I do know that David Cross was a fan of what we were doing, and we were a fan of what he was doing. And he was the most direct, I remember getting his direct email and directly emailing back and forth with him, and it being very like a casual, and me being surprised that it was just like, oh, I'm just writing back and forth with David Cross. And he was very collaborative and enthusiastic to be a part of it, and not, big agent separation and whatever. And also being surprised that I had David Cross's email. And I was like, oh, I'm just writing David Cross. Cause we were a big fan of his at that time, and thought, he was a major deal. It was a major deal, and he did a great job. It was kind of a big deal.
Yes, he's great. And I think Mark Hamill, I could be misremembering this. I know he started doing cartoon voices, but I remember being surprised at how versatile he was. Mm-hmm. I think we knew we wanted him because we liked the idea of the villain being Mark Hamill. Then we were debating, should he play the part of Shifty or not, or should we get someone else to do it? And we decided to have him do it. And he just came in like a surgeon. He's like, do you want a little Vincent Price mixed with a little, and he would just do all these voices for us. And I'm like, that is you're an amazing voice talent. I mean, he's great. I mean, we all know that now because he's done a million things, but I believe he had just started. I could be wrong. At least I didn't know that he was that versatile.
He actually does have a long history with voiceover. Like, he was doing it back in the 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he appeared, I think it was in a 1979 episode or something of one of the Scooby-Doo shows. He did a background voice. What amazed me is because I was very familiar with him from the voiceover work he kind of started doing in the 90s with the Joker and everything that kind of came after that. And a lot of stuff that he does, like a lot of voice actors, you can kind of always detect that little bit of Mark Hamill in him. And when you and I last talked, Casper, I thought someone else did Mr. Shifty, And then Mark Hamill probably came in for like 5 minutes when the mask gets pulled off, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Mark Hamill. I'm comfortable with being a star." And you were like, "No, he did Shifty." And watching it again like an hour ago, I was still like struggling to hear the Mark Hamill in it, to hear that Joker kind of rumble in the throat or whatever. And it was just such a superb kind of performance. And Shifty's like so hilarious too. His timing is so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's great. And he is so nice. And I remember, I don't know if I'm jumping around, but I was delighted that he loved being, he loves being an icon because he's a nerd. He loves science fiction, comics, pop culture. So he is not bothered by being asked about Luke Skywalker every day in the slightest. He loves it. He was super nice and down to earth. And he actually said that his kids didn't like his stuff, but they were big fans of Mr. Show. So he was excited to be in a project that his kids would like, if you can believe that.
Oh my gosh, I don't remember that. Chris, did we go out to record him or record him?
No, I wish we had. I've worked with him a few times. I've never met him in person. No, I wish we had.
I couldn't remember. I feel like we recorded him at Cartoon Network Studios. I feel like I've been to record with him at the studios, but I couldn't remember if that was this project or not. Because there's a recording set up at Cartoon Network Studios, and I feel like that I'm remembering that, but I couldn't remember if it was this or not. But I know where we recorded Gary Coleman at Davis Glick in LA, and I remember setting that up and how that all went and how fun he was to work with as well.
Yeah, and I remember one time we scheduled, but then he had to have what is that when you have the transfusion? That's
right. Called? He was not in great health during that period of time, but he was still super enthusiastic. I don't remember. I remember what you're saying, but I can't remember what the procedure.
If you're diabetic, you've got to, you got
dialysis.
Dialysis. There you go. Yeah,
he was having dialysis. That's right.
But yeah, he was super nice and although he was pretty darn, he was great too. He was a little sassy though. There's a soundbite I got to find where he was like, "I'm going to come to Atlanta and kill you." I think I'd given him a direction he didn't like. He was like, "I'm going to." That was pretty.
It
still was cute. That's in jest, but it was still cute. He just can't not be cute.
Yeah.
But it was funny. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you said it was kind of a weird time for him because like he was late for the recording because he had to go stop and renew his SAG card.
Yes, I remember he had to do that too. Do you remember that, Ashley?
Yeah.
Yes. But he was great. He was great. That guy is charming. That man was charming. Rest in peace. He had charisma for days.
Yeah.
He was harassing you he's like, why does Mark Hamill get all the jobs?
Did I tell that story? Now I'm wondering if I should have told that. But yeah, we said we're also getting Mark Hamill, and he's like, yeah, he keeps taking jobs from me. And then I was like, is that right? And he's like, yeah, I want to do all these characters too. This is talking slightly out of school. I want to do all those characters too. And I'm like, well, give me some characters and I'll keep you in mind if we do another thing. And he had no other. He didn't. He just does Gary Coleman, basically. He didn't have another character. And I'm like, well, I didn't say this, but I'm like, well, Mark Hamill does a lot of different things. He doesn't anyway. But you do one thing very well. Very well. Anyway. But yeah. Their personalities were slightly like how he wrote them before he knew them. Mark Hamill was totally chill and at peace, and Gary had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Still a good guy, but
that's
I understand him. Yeah,
that inclusion of Gary Coleman was just kind of like random and sort of a stroke of genius. Like some of the jokes that it created, like coming out of him being cast in that, having Scooby. One of my favorite gags in the whole thing was just how amazed Scooby was that Gary Coleman was there. He's like, Fred, Rary Roman. It's Rary Roman.
I have to say, Chris, I rewatched it and it's been a while, and it's so funny. It's so funny and good, and the jokes stand up, and I love how the play of obviously all three of Gary, Mark, and the gang, the joke of them all having had their moment a bit, and then it passed, and then the different levels of comfortability, I don't think that's a word, but I like to use it, with their fame and where they are now. And it just, I don't know, it really held up, and it really is still funny. And I love looking back at all these projects that we did, and it's really interesting that a lot of this was, I can't remember when we launched Adult Swim, but Scooby-Doo Project was before Adult Swim launched, obviously. I can't remember when this slots into that, but we were making stuff during that period that wasn't talking down to kids, and we weren't necessarily making kids properties. We were making sort of just animation for whatever audience was tuning in. So it's these kinds of things resonated with a whole different broad kind of audience. So the jokes maybe hit at different people at different levels, and that's why it works for so many people. And I think there was something in there for all kinds of viewers. And so this property, it's very, again, today, like what time of day would this go on? Would it be a prime time? Would it be an Adult Swim? It's funny to think about it,
I know, yeah.
Because it's not necessarily written for kids, but it's not necessarily written for adults either. And during that period of time when we were working on these things, we didn't have like a place to put this humor. So we just made stuff for ourselves, what made us laugh and what we thought was funny, and threw it out there, and it was okay. They would just put it on, which was the beauty of that period for a lot of people that watched what we did. And so anyway, when I went back and watched it, I was like, I just love the fact that this wasn't sort of like made for this place or made for that place. It was just funny, and it worked. You
guys did such a good job of walking that tightrope between kind of parody and being respectful to the original concept, dabbling in things that were, existing in kind of the fan headcanon at the time. There's like a little bit of slash fic in there, but you never take it too far. You never like take it to a point where anybody can really go, this isn't for me. I'm going to keep referencing my previous conversation with Casper. But in that last conversation, I was talking about how much I was wary of the scene where Velma and Daphne are getting ready for bed and Mr. Shifty's behind the painting, because that feeds into like so many kind of things that were in popular culture and fan headcanon and whatever. And I was wondering, because it'd been so long since I'd seen it the last time Casper and I talked, and I thought it was going to go and basically tip over that edge and go into sort of a little more adult humor, but it skirts it and it stops and it pulls it back when David Cross walks in, and then he just like opens the picture and he's like, "Hey Shifty, get these ladies some towels." And watching Shifty's eyes like bulging, I mean, that, like those old Warner Brothers cartoons, that works for kids and it works for adults, because the kids are seeing the visual, hyperbolic physical humor, and they're not necessarily getting like the sexual subtext. But the adults are kind of like tittering as they're watching it. Like
I felt the same way when I watched it too. I was like, "Oh, where's this going? I don't remember where this is going." and I had that same moment of like, was this too much for kids? Like, is this whatever? And then it was just far enough. And it was beautifully done. And I felt the same way about that scene. And it's so funny because, again, I don't know what time of day it aired, but I am guessing that it was probably during the day. And we probably aired it multiple times all through the day and in the evening during that period.
These were bumpers I'm in between like Halloween marathons, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it probably was a long stretch. It was probably not stitched together like it is now. But I will pivot the conversation as a producer hilariously to when I watched it, the animation and how beautifully stitched together. And Chris, you'll again probably remember more about how we did this exactly, but I thought it was fantastic. And I just couldn't wipe the smile off my face looking back at how this was put together on a budget. Like, we looked at, obviously, lots of old animation, figured out how to reuse and make use of episode footage that we could to enhance with new footage and new animation. But so much of the piece, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is original clips. And we would take clips and clips and clips and clips and weave in new material. And that's how we stretched $1 and also made it feel really authentic. So a lot of what is there is original footage. And then, you're seeing lots of reused stuff. And we had, at that time, these great editors that we would go in and work with that were fantastic at lip flap. So we would record and have them lip flap the original characters to meet what we needed them to say now. And then we would add and comp the new characters to original scenes in some cases. Obviously, we had to reanimate some scenes with from scratch. But I thought that the way it was all woven together was, again, I couldn't stop smiling just thinking about how we at that time had to stretch $1. Like now, if we wanted to do this, we would just make the whole thing from scratch. I don't know if we would be like, you know what, let's do is like find all this footage and, you know, comp it together and stitch it this way. We would just make the whole thing because that's how you do things now. But then it was like, let's weave a quilt of original and new and this scene and that scene and put this together because that's how we did it. We lip flapped so much in that period of time. I mean, those two words were just part of our everyday. Lip flap, lip flap, lip flap. You gotta, you know, get this together and re-lip flap. So I don't know, Chris. I mean, how is that? Is that how you remember us doing
yes.
it?
And the company that did the animation was Natterjack in Vancouver.
That's
Stephen Evangelista.
Wow. Yes. And Colleen Pollock was the producer for them.
And I didn't.
All
I didn't
cell,
go. Yes.
not on computers.
It's amazing how technology has made animation more doable. It's still a painstaking process, but it's a little more possible than it was back then. And I think I talked about this on the Scooby-Doo Project, but there's little, I think I did, but I still love talking about it, is when we figured out gate weave. Like when you do new animation, it's locked in. And old animation, which was shot on film, kind of bounces around very slightly. And that's called gate weave, where the film moves just very slightly. So we had to simulate that, just stuff like that, to make it look old.
Casper, I have a recollection of you mentioning that, because I had asked that same question of you, and you said something to the tune of, that was the plan, but you felt that like about 80% of the animation was new?
Yeah, I think more new ended up being new, but I think there's a decent amount of it that was new.
Really?
Yeah.
When
maybe I'm wrong,
it,
though.
Yeah. When I watch it, I can see, I don't know if it's 80%, but it's maybe more new than I realized, but it looks like we comped in new characters into old scenes. And it also, I mean, a lot of the van exterior, a lot of the exteriors are original footage. You can tell. And anyway, you could be right. It was probably best laid plans. But I mean, obviously anything that had a modern character in it had to be new. And so it would be interesting to go back and look at it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have to go watch it again. If you say 80%, I'm like,
maybe I'm going to back off that, I think.
I'm going to go into my files, see if I can find my original budget.
I was when I was watching it, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Freakazoid. There was a gag in that show where Cosgrove and Freakazoid are watching Congo, and the whole gag is they're trying to figure out what are guys in ape suits and what are actual apes. And it's just going back. It's like, that's an ape. No, that's a guy in a suit. That's a guy in a suit. No, that's an ape. And I'm watching Night of the Living Do, and I have what Casper's told me kind of in the back of my head, and I'm trying to like suss out, where the new and the old animation is, what I recognize as original. That posing, that has to be original. There's a couple moments of gate weave, which I was noticing because you pointed that out. Yeah, it's become like almost a drinking game for me now.
I'll definitely have to go back and try to look. I think I have a decent eye for it now, after all these years of looking at animation.
To be fair, when I first watched it, which was a few years ago, I was under the impression that there was maybe like 2% new animation, and that most of that was just meticulously repurposing old stuff. So whatever the percentage is, the approach, the basic idea of it, like nailed it. It feels very much like one of those old shows.
And you know what? I think when you call it the dark days of Scooby-Doo, it's interesting because I believe the company is more protective of Hanna-Barbera properties now. At that time, there was no one overseeing it at all.
Yes.
Really.
Yes. That's for sure. I think it's really interesting that we were able to kind of like do whatever we wanted with the characters and the franchise, and nobody was looking over our shoulder telling us yes or no. In fact, there's some scenes in there now, and I'm sure I don't know, maybe you did or didn't, but I would see a couple scenes where we would just do interesting posing with them, where they're like reaching for, and I'm like, what? That's not okay. Like, why would you do that? That's not part of the, how they would work. And just every once in a while, there would be a little bit of something where I'm like, I don't think there would be that much dimension, or whatever. And it's interesting that, we were able to have that liberty. I'm glad, because I don't think we would have been able to make a lot of things that we did. But and again, this makes me laugh because of the strange overlap, but Jay Bastian, who is very high up in Warner Brothers Animation now. I met with him at the end of last year, just caught up when we were out in Los Angeles, who was the deputy sheriff in the Scooby-Doo Project.
Oh, that's right.
He was the on-camera deputy sheriff for us in Scooby-Doo, just because he worked in programming at Cartoon at the time and maybe had nothing better to do, but he looked so nice in his sheriff's costume. He said that they're really enjoying using the characters, all of the different franchises, and letting people reinvent them and reimagine how they would work. And, they just announced, and I'll butcher the name of the show, but it's, they're doing a new show with the characters from, they're Hanna-Barbera characters.
Are you talking about Jellystone Park?
Yes, Jellystone.
For
Yes,
HBO Max.
Yes. And it looks beautiful. It looks amazing. And their idea with that is like, look, we have these classic characters. They're kind of sitting on the shelf, and they're allowing creators to come forward and think about those characters in another way and have fun. And when I talked to him about all that, he said that they're really enjoying the idea of, Huckhound back here. And some of these guys, Captain Caveman and all these characters are just sitting back there like, what? That's why there are so many Scooby spin-offs. I mean, there's so many different Scooby things going on. They do want to think about it and be cautious with it and be precious with it. But at the same time, I think they do embrace different creator visions of.
You're right, because I think the Scooby shows have been very varied and great. Like sometimes Fred will be a nerd, and they mix it up.
Yes.
And then I think about, you're right, because Marvel, they are bringing out the Q list, like, Ant-Man and everything, and they're making a big thing. So it makes total sense to do that with Hanna-Barbera as well.
Yeah, I think there's some balance between being too precious, where you just, Disney has set their characters on a shelf and they're like really super nervous about it, and they don't want to hurt their franchise and what they have. But at the same time, if you think about these new Mickey shorts that they've done, and they've released these new shorts, they have changed the style and the approach to what they've done for years and years and years, and they were wildly successful. They're beautiful. And so, the new movies that Scooby has put out, Scoob was great, and there are so many different variations of the shows that they've done. So I think, just taking a sort of open-minded approach to how you can interpret the characters, it's fun. And it makes it a little bit more something for everyone once you do that. But it is interesting because it's sort of, at least in our case, I don't know that we had to show anybody anything or report. Nobody looked at our script. It was sort of like, well, you work at the company. We're all in the same family. Like, go for it. But I don't know if it would be that way now. I don't know.
I should probably walk back a little bit on referring to it as the dark times, because you guys actually weren't operating like in the heart of the dark times, because Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island came out like a year or two before Scooby-Doo Project. And that
that's right.
And that really invigorated the IP. And I know at the time I talked to Lance Falk, who'd worked on that project, and he said it was literally Warner Brothers just looking for, what do we have that we haven't exploited? And they were like, oh, Scooby-Doo, haven't done anything with that in a while. And they grabbed some of the guys at Hanna-Barbera and they were like, do whatever you want. And it succeeded. And then all of a sudden they got interested in it. But then that also made me think the way, or the space that you guys were kind of operating in Cartoon Network had ad time that wasn't filled, so you were creating stuff to basically fill space, and they didn't think of them as the actual IP. You were creating sort of something outside that, and so you had less oversight. And I think Larry said that's probably why these things like Scooby-Doo Project would have been a beautiful bonus feature for putting it on the Zombie Island DVD or the Return to Zombie Island DVD that just came out. Any Scooby-Doo Halloween thing, any of these things could fit there. But Larry said that he's pretty sure that the parent company looks at these as essentially like commercials, like they're not actual content. So while you weren't necessarily working in the dark time, I think you were working in this interesting space.
Yeah, they may not even be aware of them, and there might be a whole contractual reason. But I think it was more, I don't know if it was filling airtime. It could be that, but I think it was more, Cartoon Network came about because Ted Turner bought the Hanna-Barbera library. So for a long time, they were starting to make new shows, but they didn't have enough to feed the whole day. So it was mostly reruns. So I think the vision was to have as much interstitials and stuff to just reinvigorate these older shows. And then
that's part of what reinvigorated Scooby, because those Scooby reruns really brought it back into people's sort of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing that popped in my head that relates to a question a while back is Michael O'Lean, who was the head of our department, who's now the head of Adult Swim. I think in terms of the comedy tone, he was inspired very much by Warner Brothers cartoons, where they would have a Humphrey Bogart caricature and slapstick. They wouldn't work. It was meant for all ages as much as possible. They didn't, because Nickelodeon and Disney were steering very hard towards kids. And I think he was going for an edgier, not adult, but all ages thing, like an old Warner Brothers cartoon, which you would go see in a movie with everybody.
I was curious, was there a conscious effort to steer away from what you'd previously done with Scooby-Doo Project with Night of the Living Do? Were you like, we did that, let's try something new? Or were you saying, boy, that was really hard, let's try something that might not be as hard, but then it ends up being just as much work, just in a different way? What was kind of I think, Casper, you said that Jeff sort of originally came up with the idea?
Yeah, I think it was him and Matt Pacini, and then Matt left, so I came on board and we wrote it together. And I was just excited. I had more stuff I wanted to make fun of or have fun with that I couldn't have done on Scooby-Doo Project. So it was fun to have more to, like the painting gag, that was fun to do. So, I just was hungry to do more with Scooby. I liked it too.
I think they're just different genres. I mean, I think one is meant to be more, making fun of the scary undertones of that being a show that's not scary, but it's meant to be scary with Scooby-Doo Project. And this one is just playing up the repetitive tropes and the comedy. And so they were just different.
Was it likely just like the creative impulse to not repeat yourself, just do something new?
Yes, let's say so.
I also think truly it's just the different origins of the writer. I mean, Jeff was very different than Larry. Larry is a cinematographer, as you know by talking with him, and he's going to run around in the woods and make something. And Jeff is very different. And the origins of this one, I could see very much that they're going to be rooted in comedy and a story, in animation. And so the two projects speak very differently of their creators. And it's funny because Chris has both in his blood, like, the YPF and Too Many Cooks, and they are very, live action cinematography combined. So you can see how Scooby-Doo Project fits with that. And he has just as much pure animation and knowledge of those, just comedy in his blood too. So both of those projects fit well to him, but I see how the origins of those two with the partners he was working on were divergent.
I guess with Larry too, he was very specific about how the Blair Witch had come out like at that time, and it was such a cultural phenomenon that it was in his head, and he was like, "Oh, those two things would go really good together." So
Yeah, that was probably
Timing.
a trigger. And there were weird, timing, exactly. There were weird assignments that we got during those periods of time when there were cultural and sort of current event things going on that we wanted to parody. All through what we did, different promos and different campaigns and stunts that we would parody, which is always kind of tough to do with animation, to be timely with it, because it takes so long to do what we're doing. But yeah, parody comes into play a lot of times with what we did, and so we would pick up on current events and try to pull that in. So that makes sense with Scooby-Doo Project for sure.
Yeah, like
and obviously, I was just going to say
ahead.
that's probably why Big Bad Voodoo Daddy isn't here, because obviously during that period of time, that kind of music was popular, and so we obviously that's why the band that we picked was ska.
It weirdly date badly though, like because Night of the Living Do is so odd, and it goes in so many kind of different directions and pulls from so many. To have them there, it's like, I mean, the name fits, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy.
Yeah, it also makes as much sense as Gary Coleman being
exactly. Yeah. So it remains as timeless as anything else.
Right.
Oh, one other thing I want to mention, since we're talking about music, that Big Bad Voodoo Daddy was great. Was Ashley was able to get the original
Hoyt Curtin
Scooby-Doo music with splits. Hoyt Curtin, I'll buy that.
Okay.
But it was so amazing because you could hear him talking between takes. And
right.
I mean, but it was all separated. It was like if you wanted just the flute and you wanted to slide it, you could do all that. Why didn't I walk away with a copy of that? But it was also just gorgeous. I like soundtracks, but I'm not a soundtrack person, and we all know what we're talking about here. But I would have that soundtrack. It was pretty great. I don't know how, and it was hard. I actually had to do some work to get that.
Every time I talk to you guys, man, it makes like the archivist in me weeps.
Well, I told Mike that I've got this box in the basement that's got digibetas and CDs and stuff, and I've got to go dig around and see what I can find in that box for him. But we'll see. It's Hoyt Curtin. I just looked it up.
Okay, Hoyt Curtin. It's so beautiful. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I mean, as long as we're talking about that kind of stuff, I think that for whatever reason, I don't know that I paid as much. It was so easy to book the original artists of Frank Welker and Grey Delisle and those guys at that time. We booked them all the time for all the stuff we had to do. And I know I had moments of booking them and thinking, wow, this is kind of a big thing, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I'm going to book them again next week for something else. So I don't know that I thought about it as much as I probably should have. And it was the same for a lot of different projects that we did, that we were booking those original voice talents and working with them on a regular basis, where I probably should have pinched myself more often. But what incredible talents those guys were. And what a great job. And it didn't matter what weird stuff we brought to them. They're like, okay, this is fun. I'll do it. And just did a great job. I mean, their comedy and their timing and their professionalism was amazing. Right. I mean,
yes.
Actually, I was just going to say, you kind of touched on something that I wanted to ask, which was because you guys took these characters in kind of really weird places, like even not just in Night of the Living Do and Scooby-Doo Project, but in those origin interstitials where they talked about, where the mystery machine came from or where they get the funding from and just all that. And Fred, drag racing people and whatever, like they were playing these characters in a very parody place. And I know that some of them are kind of protective of these roles. And I wondered, when you give them this weird stuff, are they just like, oh, this is new stuff to play? Or were they kind of like, this is a little bit weird for this character?
I think in general, they all were very game. And we're into, because that would be a concern, but everyone was into it. I think, because we were using Scott Innes. We didn't use Casey Kasem, who I know doesn't like to reference meat, or he's vegetarian. Yeah. But no, I that is always a worry, but I think they were into it. And this is a total sidebar, but talking about one of those characters, Ashley, we did a project. I don't know how much Hanna-Barbera you know other than Scooby, Mike, but we out of mothballs we got Yacky Doodle, The character
I
Yankee
remember
Doodle.
this, Chris.
And I don't think he had done that since that show. I think he talked about he hadn't done it since that show, I think.
It was difficult because I was very Yankee Doodle and Top Cat. Top Cat, I think it was the same project. I don't remember. I was really enthusiastic because I was so proud to have booked the original talent. But then it sadly did not work out because they had just aged out of doing the role. And so I felt so bad because these guys had to do the record and be gracious and go through it and then come out the other side and be like, yeah, I think we need to re-record with someone else because I don't know if the Yankee Doodle is gonna hold up after all this time. So it's tough when some of the voice actors do get advanced in years and can't do a solid Yankee Doodle anymore. But it was kind of the same way with Casey Kasem, I guess, in this particular case, because we were using a sound alike. And, it is what it is. But back to Frank and Gray, I mean, those guys were still doing the voices and were doing a great job. And I think they appreciated the comedy that we were sending their way and the tongue-in-cheek humor of all this and kind of making good fun of their characters and all of that. I don't think we ever had any pushback about any of those kinds of things.
That probably ties into the fact that, I mentioned earlier, you guys sort of pushed some boundaries, but you never went over the edge. Like you never took it into a place that was in bad taste.
Was disrespectful. Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, that would be different, I think. But yeah, we were never disrespectful. It's one thing to kind of, he not unlike, Mark Hamill or whatever, has probably made fun of his own ascot so many times, and that kind of thing. They're probably getting used to it by now. But they do it and they're professional and they probably still love playing those roles, I would assume. Yeah, I don't know that actually Frank, I was looking in the credits of Scoob to see what I don't think he played. You probably know better than me. He plays Scooby instead of Frank.
Efron
Fred
plays Fred.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, it kind of was charming to me that he was still part of it, but I thought it was really interesting that he was Scooby instead of Fred.
Yeah, he ended up taking over the role of Scooby after Don Messick passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just, I think for the last 20 years or 15 years or whatever it's been, he's been Scooby.
He's been Scooby.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I continue to be amazed at the freedom that you guys had. Like just I don't want to say lack of oversight because I know that you guys were supported by the network, but your ability to just mine the entire Hanna-Barbera catalog. And I mean, we talked about Yankee Doodle just a second ago and Casper brought up Top Cat. And I wanted to applaud Ashley, you sent me that link to the first 13th annual Fancy Anvil Awards. And when Top Cat came on, I was like, yes, because he's one of my favorite Hanna-Barbera characters. And not a lot of people seem to know about him. He kind of flies under the radar. And just the fact that you guys, I don't know if you knew the characters and were bringing them, back out of kind of love or whatever, or if you were just like, oh, what are we going to do with this thing? And let's use this character. I kind of I was sort of around for that period. And I remember seeing these things, when I was, I guess, 20 years ago now, and being really compelled at how interesting and invigorating and kind of meta and there's a word that I can't think of that would fit perfectly there. And I kind of miss that. We don't really see a lot of that now because the IP is a lot more sort of protected, the brand, right? Like you don't want to push Scooby too far. And we've seen I'm always bringing up the show Be Cool Scooby-Doo, it pushed it into a little bit more of a absurdist kind of zany sort of comedy place. And both the fans and either the network or Warner Bros., I'm not sure who, wasn't as supportive of it because it was a little bit off brand. And back then, like even the fans, because I mentioned how Scooby-Doo Project is so beloved, and it's this legendary piece of like Scooby-Doo content that everybody kind of remembers, and nobody has anything bad to say about it. But I think if it came out now, it might be a little bit more sort of controversial with the fans because the brand is so much more in place. You know what I mean? And what people think of as these characters is a little bit more settled. And I know there isn't really a question there.
No, I know what you mean.
Just kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, like I think that what you're saying is that fan culture is a little different. For a long time, let's take Star Wars. When the Star Wars Christmas special came out, we knew it was bad, but it didn't make us angry. It was kind of, you know what I mean? I think now some people are more hardcore about how a brand. Some fans are more rigid about a brand, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Well, even going, you use the Star Wars reference. There was a show that George Lucas produced. It was kind of the last thing that they did that's never seen the light of day. It was called Star Wars Detours. And Seth Green and his collaborator...
Matt Senreich?
Yes, Matt Senreich. They produced, I think, like 26 episodes of this thing. And it was right before Disney bought Star Wars, Lucasfilm. And Disney didn't want something that made fun of Star Wars out there while they were trying to rebrand Star Wars. They didn't want these characters to be viewed as silly. They just got more protective of the brand. And I know there were fans who were kind of ready for it at the time. And I think fans would probably be ready for it now. I mean, it goes in waves. But I sort of feel like people were a lot more open back in the late 90s, early 2000s to this kind of parody with these characters than they would be today. I mean, just using the sort of response to Be Cool Scooby-Doo is a good example where you change the designs and people just flip out. I mean, they're iconic characters. They're very elastic. They can take a lot of pushing and pulling in a lot of different directions, either narratively or design-wise. I mean, I recently spoke to somebody where we talked about how you just put the right colors together and people instantly identify that as a Scooby-Doo character. And I guess some artists made some abstract images where they would just do a purple block with, a pink stripe or something, and people would be like, that's Daphne. Or you'd have, blue and white and red, and that's Fred. Yeah,
really
again,
cool.
I'm not 100% sure I'm going with this, but it's just the freedom that you guys had to play with this stuff. It kind of amazes me, and I kind of miss it.
I think it is. I think there's something to the fact that when you do something during the period of time that we were doing it, and it was a period of time when, to your point, it wasn't a dark period, but it was a bit of a desert for the franchise. There wasn't a lot coming out. There wasn't a lot for people to hang on to. So when there was something new, and it was very different, like what we were doing was very different. It wasn't a show. It wasn't, it was a little bit long form, a little bit short form. It came in bits, and it was just totally different than what, they were used to seeing. And so, yes, there were parts of it that were rough around the edges and it wasn't perfectly done. And certainly when you look back at something that's 20 years old, to use Casper's analogy, you're more forgiving for anything that's not, perfectly produced or, perfectly done, because there's a bit of nostalgia to it. And you're like, okay, I think I can overlook, that composite job that may not be the best, or those characters running around in the woods or this or that, because of the spirit of it and when it was done and your fondness for the franchise. So you, for whatever reason, when things come out now, again, using Star Wars as a good representative sample, if Mandalorian came out and it looked horribly composited, or if Scoob came out and it was not well produced, people would not be as kind about those kinds of things. And I don't know if Cartoon came out now with something that was stitched together and not well produced or whatever, if people would be that forgiving. But when we were doing it, it was the first time it had been done and people hadn't seen that before. And it was, at the time, somewhat new technology, and we were figuring it out as we went. And so yeah, I mean, I think we did have quite a bit of freedom, and we were using that freedom to try new things. And so that's why everybody kind of felt like they were on that ride with us. And when people do look back at it, they're forgiving of whatever flaws are, they see as part of that. And it makes it more endearing, I think, to me and to anyone that's looking back at it now. I agree that I don't know that it would have the same, if it worked the same way that it does now, but there's so many things like that. I mean, there's so many shows from different time periods that just don't hold up. And I think it's just part of the magic of things that happen when they are meant to happen. That all happened because of the magic of when we were there and when we put it together and the ideas that happened. And we're doing different things now, and it's happening in the time it's supposed to happen. I think people look back at that period of time of the network and get frustrated that this period of time is not the same as it felt then, but don't totally and fully understand why. And I think Casper did a good job at trying to explain this on one of the podcasts I heard him talk about before, why it was the way it was. And the network was obviously very young, and we didn't have the same amount of advertisers that we have, or they have now. And it was so funny being there during that period of time and just sort of looking over at your competitors and wishing that you had a cereal ad, like cereal ads and toy ads. And we genuinely, when we were there, and I can distinctly close my eyes and remember having Anne Marie direct-to-video CD ads on Cartoon Network over and over and over, and thinking, why are we selling Anne Marie CDs on this channel to kids? And it's because we didn't have the ad sales to sell real ad space yet. And lots of direct 1-800, which is so funny now, call in to buy, these horrible, they were called blow pins. I still remember, like, you blow through it and ink comes out, and just not great ads. And I was like, man, if we could just get real, like, cereal commercials and toy commercials and Legos, and, but we weren't there yet. So we had so much time to fill. And, they kept coming to us like, fill up this time. And again, he explained about KidVid rules, and you have to separate the shows from the space. And there were just only so many commercials you could air per hour, and it left a lot of space. And so it was our job during that period of time to fill up that space. So we made groovies, we made shorties, we made interstitials, we made bumpers, we made packaging, and we had to do it on a dime. And we had to come up with all kinds of things and ways to use old footage. And when you ask the question about, did we watch the shows, and, did we understand the characters? And we hadn't, in the early days, launched all of these franchises yet. Again, it was built on this Hanna-Barbera library. So we didn't early on have Powerpuff Girls and Dexter and all these shows. We were still working with kind of the shows that hadn't moved to Boomerang yet. But all of the people that worked there, I mean, genuinely, without exception that I can think of, loved this stuff, like truly loved cartoons and animation, and knew these characters and understood what they were working with, and the comedy, and were talented, like a really talented group of people that just dug into these characters and found sort of like the fun and interesting things to pull out and the underlying stories. And so that's where all of this stuff came from that we made, was to fill up this time. And so I think that's where, a lot of this magical stuff came from, and why people look back at that period with such fondness is because now the network has gone on to skyrocket to #1, and everybody wants their cereal commercial and their toy ad during those spaces. And there's not as much time for interstitials as there was. And we were making, crazy stuff to fill up the time. Now they don't necessarily have the time to put this kind of thing on anymore.
Fair enough. I just want to qualify, irreverent was the word I was looking for previously that I said would be perfect. Irreverent.
Yes.
Was there ever a point where you felt that freedom sort of slowly disintegrating?
Yes.
Yes?
For sure. And it's when we began to do better. I mean, the better we did, the more marketing got involved and ad sales, and more meetings that we had, and the less time we had to fill. And, with success comes more intervention. And it was like a double-edged sword. The more success we had, the more money we had to work with, but the more oversight we had. And it just began to change. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Yes, but I think I left to go to Adult Swim before
That started happening.
that happened. Yeah.
When did you make the move?
I think 2004.
I left in 2005.
Okay.
So that's probably around the time when things started to change, to answer your question. Yeah.
Looking back on these things, like they've survived in various forms, obviously kind of finding their eventual home on the internet, on YouTube for the last decade plus, and not in very good copies.
Yeah, it's surprising, right?
Until Larry posted the rip that he had made off of his DVD, like the Scooby-Doo Project copies that were out there were really hard to watch. And Night of the Living Do, the existing ones that are out there right now, are a bit of a challenge. It's like watching an old, rundown VHS tape that's sort of seen better days. But it kind of doesn't matter. Like, people still go to these, people still watch them, and they still get out of it what they're supposed to be getting out of it. Like, there's still love for it. It doesn't matter the video quality, which maybe feeds into something that Steven Soderbergh kind of experimented with a few years ago, where he wanted to see, like, how much can you degrade the video quality of a film but keep the audio quality good before an audience gives up on it. And I guess if the content, like if the writing, if the jokes, if all of that stuff still lands, I guess it doesn't really matter, if it doesn't look crisp.
That's interesting. What is that called, by the way, the Soderbergh thing?
Well, it was something he did on the movie Full Frontal.
Oh, okay.
And I was listening to the audio commentary, and he kept talking about how they kept pushing, they kept degrading the video image. He kept telling his people, like, make it worse, make it worse, make it worse. And
That's funny.
He just wanted to see, if the audio, if you could still hear everything, but it gets harder and harder to see, or it's not as good a picture. I thought that was fascinating. It's actually informed a lot of stuff that I've done kind of since seeing that as well, because the audio does seem to be almost the most important element.
I'm pretty sure I have a pristine copy of Night of the Living Do. I think I have. I tried to have everything I made, and they were still on D2s, and I one day just gave it to an editor, and I had him dump it all, digitize it all. So I should have that.
Does it have the credits intact?
It would have it would be everything. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I don't think anybody's seen the credits for like 20 years.
You want me to find that and give it to you?
That would be amazing.
Okay, I'll do it.
I'm never going to say no to stuff like that, Casper.
You can upload it or something if you want, whatever you want.
If you ever ask
sure
the
they
question,
don't care.
do you want me to find that? It's going to be yes.
Well, there's a lot of stuff from that era. Like we did fake Super Bowls. They did fake elections. I mean, award ceremony. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, hours and hours and hours of stuff.
It's so crazy. And it is funny that, I don't know, I one of the links I sent you, Scooby was elected president. We did a big election in
The
2000.
Martha's Vineyard, yeah.
Yeah, and so the Martha's Vineyard one is so funny. And I don't know, I really to this day still don't know how this was ever approved. But he was elected president in this huge campaign in 2000 where everybody, like every character ran for president. And we made buttons. There was a spot that was shot with Bob Dole during that campaign. Not kidding. I didn't produce that, but for that cartoon campaign. And so Scooby wins. And in 2001, Dave Drabick, a different writer, was like, I have this idea. Why don't we go to Martha's Vineyard and shoot a spot for Scooby that he won, and he vacations in Martha's Vineyard. And I was like, okay, if we can convince. So I put down how much it would cost on paper. Then we went into Olean, and he was like, are you kidding me? And I said, look, it would be cheaper to just go up there and shoot this with an ENG crew than it would be to like get Scott footage and this and this and this. I'm just telling you how much it would cost. Like the plane tickets are literally like $200. We could go up there and blah, blah, blah. So he's like, fine. So we went to Martha's Vineyard for like 2 days. We flew up there, shot this footage, and put Scooby in the front of a boat. Like we just calmed him in the front of a boat. There was genuinely no reason that I can think of that we needed to go. We went there with, I remember who went, Marty, Don Bohannon. We took a crew from here. We flew up there Me, Dave Drabick, and two shooter and an audio guy, for which we needed audio. I have zero idea why. I guess we asked the people. We were like, we were asking them the president, because they didn't know they were talking about Scooby-Doo. They thought they were talking about Clinton because he went there. So we only said the president, and then we came back and put it together like they were talking about Scooby. And so we were like, what's it like when the president's here? And they were all talking about Clinton. And we ate lobster, big lobsters that night, huge lobsters, and we flew home. Put Scooby in the front of a boat.
But don't they have to sign releases?
Yeah, they signed releases, but they didn't. We told them after the fact that it was about Scooby, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We were like, just so you know, we're not talking about Clinton, but to get genuine answers.
Right.
They were like, oh, it's fantastic when he's here. He doesn't, he acts like a regular person. And so that was the funny part,
That was going to be my next question, because we talked off mic about you interviewing Phyllis Diller and Tim Conway and Don Knotts and how they improv'd. And obviously, as performers, that's something that they would be accustomed to. But when you're talking to, person on the street.
Regular people,
yeah.
Yes, so we did
improv that.
No, they thought they were talking about the actual president. And then that's why the spot was so funny, is because they, the answers were meant to be about the actual president. But since we were only saying the president, we just juxtaposed Scooby as the president, and they thought they were talking about the real president. It was a riot, and I got a big lobster out of it.
Just such a big smile on my face when I think about just the weird stuff you guys did.
I do too. But you know what? We still get to do weird stuff. Chris's imagination is boundless. He's always coming up with weird stuff. Always. So.
Yes. It's fun. Yes.
That's the lucky part for me.
I mean, I'm not current, but I am a viewer of Your Pretty Face. Really enjoy it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I guess I kind of make a little bit of a distinction, because that's yours, right? You can do whatever you want. It's something you created, and
with Dave Willis, who co-created Aqua Teen, yeah.
But I mean, it's not an established brand or IP or anything where you're coming in and giving it a twist. So I think that's, as much as I enjoy Your Pretty Face, that's why I kind of get that big smile whenever I think of the Cartoon Network stuff, because it was the stuff that was already established for 30 years, stuff that existed 30 or 40 years for some of those characters.
Chris, does it feel limiting to you when you're working with an established franchise versus working from scratch, or does it feel, not the same? But I don't know that I ever felt like you were, I mean, of course I wasn't in your head, but I never felt like when you got those assignments, you were like, this is so frustrating. I'm in a box. You know what I mean?
No, I love it. And there's even a creativity saying about that of too much blue sky, where limitations, or it has to be about the snorks. It gives you an area of focus to work in a fun, creative problem, rather than, hey, just do something funny. That's more stressful in a way. So those limitations are great. And those were great characters. And I grew up with a lot of them. And then the ones I didn't remember, it was fun we had a library, and we all had VHSs in our cubes, and we would watch just cartoons all day. We'd check them out from the library and be like, you don't have, Funky
Snorks,
Phantom episode 4. It's out with Steve Patrick's got it. Well, I need it or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. That's right. Oh, the day when DVDs came out and we didn't have to get the VHS or the 3/4 inch copies of everything. But yeah, that's so funny. Yeah.
Actually, what was your connection to animation? What did you watch? Was it something you were interested in? Was it something you were did you just sort of stumble into it, or was it always something you were interested in as a kid growing up?
Me?
Yeah.
I loved animation growing up, and I actually studied advertising in school. So that's how I ended up in a, advertising kind of path, and then in on-air promos, because basically, as Casper kind of described in earlier conversations, Oline is responsible for setting up the promos department, kind of like an internal ad agency. And so producers were brought in to work with the writers to take the producing responsibilities, the scheduling and booking and finance, the producing responsibilities off of their plate so they could stay creative. And we were brought in to kind of manage those things. I've always seen myself as a creative producer, not just, managing a schedule and the legal and all those things, but as Chris said, trying to be collaborative, find creative solutions to problems rather than just saying, oh, here's what our budget will allow. And I think it makes for a better product when you think that way. So my path was through advertising, but it was really funny when I, through just industry connections, came to that group, which I didn't totally know about promo departments until I was recommended to go interview there. And when I had my first interview in that department, and then I had to go through a process of probably no less than 8 interviews to get the job I got, which was started as a production coordinator. I felt like I had gotten to the island of misfit toys. I was like, oh, this is where all these people are that I have been trying to find literally my entire life. And I had this panic. I was like, if I don't get this job, then that's it for me. Like, this is the place I've meant to be, all this whole time. Because it was this really crazy collection of people that I had been seeking, and I didn't realize it until I got there. And I was like, oh, here they are. Here they all are. So, and I've felt that way all since. It's kind of like not exactly nerds, just people that have been thinking along different lines and exposed to different stuff and appreciate different things, and maybe have a Scooby podcast and love animation more than other people do, and stuff. And everybody was kind of there in a pile together, wading through this crazy bunch of stuff in a really funny time. So it was a great place for me to slot into right at that moment.
How old were you guys when you got in there?
20s, in our 20s, I guess.
Yeah. 20s. And we had to do a writer's test, which was super fun. Did you guys have to do anything like that, or no?
No writer's test for me, thank goodness. But yeah, just a battery of interviews with all kinds of different people multiple times. And I remember when I had my interview with Oline, just totally feeling like I failed, because I was from an ad background and he came from an ad background, and I was living in New York at the time. And so he was asking me, detailed questions about some of my favorite campaigns. And I just felt like he was hypercritical of what my tastes and kind of things. And it was interesting. I in hindsight, he liked me more than I thought, but I just didn't know that. I couldn't tell. I didn't know him well at the time. I wasn't sure how to read it. So I almost wish there was a test, but I would have had a better read on it.
At my interview, I wore a suit, and I think I was the only person in a suit in the entire building. Because my dad was like, "Well, of course you're going to wear a suit," and I'm like, "Yeah, all right. It's a job interview."
I have these pictures of us during this, like printed pictures, because there were no digital cameras at the time, and I'll find them and send them to you, of us making Scooby-Doo Project. And literally, I have a pigtail, like a ponytail, in most of the pictures. We were young, and we were like, it's funny how I say we were kids, but we were really young and really, just having an amazing time making that stuff. And I think the guys mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts that, we went out to this, Steve, Patrick, and I guess Larry was there. I don't think you came on this one though, but when we went out to this drive-in in Ellijay, which is in North Georgia, to shoot the movie promos. And I have on overalls and a pigtail, and we climbed up. It was at night. We climbed up on the marquee, and genuinely, it was like, for most of these things, which I still can't fathom to this day, they just threw us the keys. They, like, whoever this was, threw us the keys to this whole drive-in. And there's all these pictures of us just like climbing up on the marquee and changing out the letters of the marquee to say Scooby-Doo Project Thursday night. but there wasn't like a person that was helping us. They're like, there's the bucket of the letters. See you tomorrow. Just drop off the keys under the mat or something. We're all behind the snack bar, like posing and having fun. Like it's just we just had the keys to this whole drive-in and did whatever we wanted. And the same thing with the Mystery Machine when we went to Canada. I still think back on that. I'm like, what? Like it was like somebody just dropped the keys to us and we drove all around doing whatever, just the three of us. I don't think that would be how that worked now.
No.
I don't think that would be how that worked now. They would be like, okay, well, you can have it from 1 hour on Thursday and there'll be clearly like a driver there with you, not just pick up the keys at the Holiday Inn or however. And I was thinking also, Chris, like producing that then, I look back on it and think there was no smartphone. Like there were no Google Maps. There was barely an internet then. So we had to just use a paper map to drive around Canada, I guess. I'm like, how did we do that? It's so funny to think about that. I guess
driving around backwoods Ontario.
Yeah, I guess I printed a MapQuest or a AAA triptych for us. I'm thinking back on it, it's just
I love
funny.
the story you were telling off mic because Larry had created that little behind the scenes 7-minute making
Yes.
of whatever. Ashley said that she was watching it and just kind of watching it, like she got emotional.
I did. I don't know about you, but when I watched that, it was so emotional for me. I started crying at the end. It was so sweet. And so, I don't know, it was like a little time capsule for me, re-experiencing that behind the scenes and thinking about us just going on that trip and taking cameras and making something. Again, a lot of times I feel like these things that we were making for other people, we were also making for us. We were making for our department and we were making for the network. Like, and I don't mean the network like the suits. I mean for our friends in programming and our friends in marketing and our, making for each other because we thought this is going to be great for the Island of Misfit Toys. Like everybody's going to love this thing. And isn't this fun? And isn't it great? And so watching that, it just brought back all of that for me. And it was just such a magical thing to think about how down and dirty it was to make some of that stuff with just literally three of us, a camera that you held sometimes, I held sometimes, Larry held sometimes, and we're just running around. And like, we had a roll of caution tape. So I just rolled out the caution tape and we taped it up and, we just made it. And there's just something so crazy about that and how much of that work Larry did in the woods of setting up sticks. And then you guys went over to here and, so much of it was really handmade. And of course, I'm just talking about the live action parts that we had these super talented artists doing the animation and the composite work and obviously the sound and all of the things that went into it. I'm not trying to minimize all that, but the collaborative spirit of it and all that, it was pretty awesome to go back and think about those things. I still have, like, I can remember moments of Larry talking about Tim Hortons donuts on that trip. And it's 20 years ago, it's just funny.
It's kind of rewarding, these conversations, this one and the previous one with Casper and Larry. I was surprised when I got the email where Larry was like, by the way, I was just feeling really inspired prior to our conversation. So I made a 7-minute making of video. Like the fact that his memories and his nostalgia and thinking about it got him in a place where he wanted to go and like dig through old tapes and like edit something together. And then seeing like the reaction that you have to the thing that he made and watching, I remember watching Casper and Larry in the room and just the smile that Casper had on his face with some of the stories and just the camaraderie and sort of what it inspires and the, again, now I'm looking for a word that I'll remember in 15 minutes. It feels, it's rewarding to have sort of inadvertently inspired that by making the contact and saying, hey, do you want to talk about this? And then it's doubly rewarding to see how you guys are and how you feel about it and interact with each other and the fellowship that's there. It just kind of cements the idea that I sort of had about working there at that time and the projects that you guys were doing. So yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful to you for thinking of it and being a fan of it and bringing it up. And I think Chris probably shares this feeling. It's interesting when you see people appreciate work that you've done, even, recently, much less something that's 20 years old, and seeing these articles that people are bringing forth, and your podcast that's like celebrating something that, has an anniversary. And in your mind, it's been interesting over my career when you make something and you think it's great and you work hard on it and you think, I hope someone sees this. I hope someone sees this because it's so cool and you're so excited about it and you put it out there. And one of the easiest ways that I can explain this is, and I honestly don't even remember the marathon, but I worked on some marathon early on in my career at the network, and it had a contest tied to it. And this was during the time when you called in an 800 number. And I remember turning on, a lot of times you don't even turn on the TV on the night that the thing that you finally make airs. But this time I did. And I remember being so excited because it was finally coming to air, and there was an 800 number and kids were supposed to call in if they, wanted to try to enter this contest. And I don't know why this resonated for me so much, but I kept calling the number and it was busy every time. And I thought, they're watching it. It's working. Kids are seeing this and kids are calling in. And I think this happened to Chris and I with Too Many Cooks when we made this crazy thing and we worked really hard on it. And it was supposed to be just this thing that no one would see. Very much so. It was very much supposed to be this thing that no one would see because we had built up a team to work on the next season of Chris's show, YPF. And we weren't quite ready to start production yet. So we had a visual effects and animation team sitting there with not much to do. So he's like, well, I got this thing, it's a crazy thing. So they shot the footage and we made all this stuff and we did this animated 2D sequence and all these things. And they put it on at 4:00 in the morning. And then everyone saw it and it went cuckoo crazy and people responded. And I think when people love something that you made and it's not just you and your friends that love what you made, it makes you feel, I don't know, really amazing, because it's like we love what we do because we're super nerds and you love animation and you love these crazy characters and you love comedy and you love parody and you love the art of animation. But then you realize you've reached a generation of people that are now 20 years older and they're still watching or they're still interested in it. So it's incredibly validating. It's really magical, I think.
Yeah, you guys were there at like a flashpoint. Like there was a group of people that were just the right age who were like looking for content. And I mean, when I was a kid, it didn't matter what it was. It didn't have to be good. If it was animated, you watched it. And it generally only aired on Saturday morning. And, with the advent of something like Cartoon Network and those, even just bringing back the old Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers cartoons, like that was stuff that people didn't really have a lot of access at that time because you'd have like bits and pieces of it on VHS tapes here and there. But just having that access to it, and then the new content kind of rolling out. And it was really formative for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people I talked to my age or 10 years younger, like they look back on those times and those are like the golden years. And a lot of that has to do with the work that you guys were doing, because you guys, and then after you with when the original programming started, and then Adult Swim, and that was huge. And now there's silence.
No, it was great. It was great. Yes.
It was a great time.
All right, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for regaling me with tales of old Cartoon Network and working on these projects, Night of the Living Do in specific. Is there anywhere on social media you guys want to be found?
I'm on Twitter at Hey Casper Kelly.
You can find us on Instagram at awesomeinc_ATL.
And is there any projects you want to plug before we're out? Nope? Okay.
Not yet, no.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. This has been a real treat.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks so much.
Ashley, this was so fun. It was just great to see your face and hear your voice again. And Mike, of course, you as well.
You too. Thanks so much, guys. I look
Take
forward
care.
to talking to you again. Bye.
All right, bye.
And that, dear listener, brings us to the end of another conversation. I hope you enjoyed spending a little time with Ashley and Casper. Ashley, of course, being the producer, and Casper, the co-writer of Night of the Living Do, one of several projects that they were involved in during their time at Cartoon Network in the late 90s and early aughts. Projects that are still interesting, hilarious, and 110% have stood the test of time. Scooby-Doo Project turned 20 last year, and Night of the Living Do will turn 20 next year. We're still talking about these things. We're still hunting these things down online. Proof is in the pudding, folks. Now, if you want to keep up with what Ashley and Casper are up to beyond these projects and this conversation, as they stated at the end of the interview, you can find Casper on Twitter at Hey Casper Kelly. And for Ashley, you can check out the Awesome Incorporated website. Shows you all the projects that Awesome Incorporated have worked on, are working on. Keep up to date with kind of what's coming down the pike. And you can also check out Awesome Incorporated on Instagram. It's Awesome Incorporated, Awesome Inc. _ATL. Give them a follow, like some posts, spread the love. Show them some Halloween spirit. And speaking of Halloween, I did promise in the intro that I would be discussing something in the way of a treat. This is something that I've actually, I think, talked about on a previous episode or two. When I had Casper and Larry on for the Scooby-Doo Project, we recorded an original commentary for the Scooby-Doo Project, but Larry actually had an in-house commentary that was recorded back in 2000. It was something that circulated only on DVDs among crew at Cartoon Network, and it features Ashley, at the time Nixon, now Kohler, Larry Morris, Casper Kelly, and co-writer Steve Patrick. Larry shared a copy of that with me and said that it would be okay for me to post it. So to go hand in hand with my existing Scooby-Doo Project commentary, there is now this secondary Scooby-Doo Project commentary, which is kind of cool because it gives you a perspective of the project from not quite as far a distance. There's a different perspective, and it's definitely worth the listen. So this episode, I'm considering my conversation with Ashley and Casper to be my Halloween trick, and the Halloween treat for all of you is this commentary, which I should be posting shortly after I'm posting this. It's going to be 2 episodes floating out there. Pay attention to the social media. That's where you're going to find all the links if you are not currently a subscriber. And if you are not currently a subscriber, I don't want to judge, but why not? You could find the podcast pretty much everywhere on all good podcast providers. Give the show a subscribe. Support the show. You can also follow, share, and subscribe on the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, either a podcast named Scooby-Doo or at Scooby-Doo-Cast. And there's also a blog, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, where I'll feature text interviews, other stuff. I don't post there as often as I'd like to. I actually wanted to get a review for Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo up by Halloween or before Halloween, and it didn't happen. So if my previous conversation with Maxwell Adams wasn't enough of a review of how much I enjoyed it, I might still get one up. It doesn't seem as timely to do it beyond Halloween, but there you go. I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. That'd be a nice double whammy. This conversation and Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo. I'd spend my night that way. Maybe throw in Night of the Living Do as your, or Scooby-Doo Project as your like before movie cartoon. This is golden, people. If you're not writing this down and doing this tonight, you're only living half a life. Anyways, like I said, watch for that commentary. It's going to be dropping right away. Thank you guys so much for checking out the show, downloading, If you are getting the show off of Apple Podcasts, just a reminder, like and review the show. It really does still help with the algorithms and getting the show visible and into the eyes and ears of people who may dig this content and just aren't seeing it for some reason. Algorithms can be a real bitch. Blessing and a curse. They help and they hinder. So with that, take care, you guys. Have a very safe and very happy Halloween. I think my next episode is going to be with animator Tom Cook, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks for spending the time with me today. I hope you join me for the next episode of the podcast. And until then, remember,
I'm comfortable with my fame. Sure, it's only a small part of who I am, but that's showbiz. I'm just grateful I mean so much to so many people.
Happy Halloween.
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery.
So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.